Welcome, everybody, to the Fantasy Formula Live. Adam and Terry are here with you ahead of qualifying for the Mexican Grand Prix. Terry, it's great to have you back.
It's good to be back. 2 weeks in a row. Blimey, we will know what's happening next week, will we? Let's be honest about it.
Well, it's great to have you. Rob's not here this week, but he sends his regards, and he will be here for Brazil in just 1 week. So we'll send Rob all our best this weekend. All right, let's turn the page and get right into some of that free practice data because it was a bit of a mixed bag throughout the 3 sessions. On Friday, FP1, we had 5 rookies on the grid doing all sorts of dirty work with these guys' cars. We had Charles his car got tangled up when Ollie Behrman had the incident with Alex Albon when he was out of control. Robert Schwartzman got a 5-second penalty or a 5-place penalty for a race that he may never even participate in. Were there any big takeaways from you, Terry, in free practice 1? Because it was one of the cleanest sessions of the weekend.
No, I think the only thing was obviously Max and his engine issues that's been sort of plaguing him, certainly yesterday. Obviously, we've not seen too much of it today, but certainly that's probably the biggest takeaway from free practice 1 was all the rookies in there and obviously the repairs to Alex Albon's car after that crash. But apart from that, it seemed, a pretty okay session, I'd probably say. We haven't seen too much from the teams and too much from the data in terms of, setting the world light in terms of lap times yet. It seems a lot of cars were turned down. We had a lot of changes. I think it was Passo was driving Lando's car, switched the floor halfway through because obviously they've only got 1 floor between 2 cars. They want to do a comparison on it. So there's some things like that still going on. It feels like the cost cap's really hitting teams at the moment, if I'm honest. For what we're hearing, we heard Toto talk about it yesterday and again today. And it feels like it when you look at spare parts, downgrading parts, all these issues that the teams are facing. There's either one, they haven't got it with them because they're obviously on flyaway and the turnaround is too quick on this triple header. So like George's car, they couldn't get it physically fixed and back in time because of the logistics behind it. So I think they're struggling as well in terms of everything else. So yeah.
One of the big takeaways for me as we go through these free practice tables is Carlos Sainz in the top 3. It's something we'll see throughout all 3 practice sessions. And it was the first time that fantasy strategists really started wondering, is Carlos Sainz an interesting shout this week, coming off the heels of the Ferrari 1-2 at COTA last week. So moving on to FP2, once again, Sainz at the top of the table. Yuki Tsunoda still in P3 here. Tell me what you thought about FP2, and with that extra running time for the Pirelli tire test, did that throw anybody's run plan off, or does this feel like real running order to you?
It threw it off. It was a bit of a ball draw, wasn't it, with that Pirelli tire test? They do those set programs. They have to go out and run it. And I think that, again, it doesn't give you a comparison. They can't tweak the setups. They have to do what Pirelli want them to do. And I know why they've got to do it. And I understand the need for Pirelli to gather that data. But it just makes, for me, a really boring session in terms of long runs, what they're doing, because they're just not doing a lot. And then, of course, we had these couple of red flags in there as well, which took a chunk of time out. So, again, not really that much in terms of what we're seeing. Cars were turned down. We know that McLaren yesterday were turned down on both their engines. Teams are saving them. And, so not too much to read into it, I don't think.
Yesterday was the day that on F1 TV, we saw them break down James Hinchcliffe's tryout with the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders from COTA. So it was definitely a slow day. A lot of red flags and a lot of inaction on the track. And then moving on to FP3, Terry, you mentioned a moment ago, McLaren had their engines dialed down a little bit yesterday, but it looks like they're full throttle today because 1-2 for Piastri and Norris in FP3.
Yeah, it looked like back to normal running, didn't it? I mean, we don't know what setup these McLarens are running. Like I said, there's a bit of a mixed match going on. Oscar apparently hasn't got the Austin front wing on it. Lando might be running the floor. He might not be, depending on what data they got. So I think it's a real mismatch of it. Interesting point I saw earlier was only Ferrari running the highest downforce rear wing out of everyone else. Both McLaren and Mercedes are actually running like medium downforce ones. They're not running the Monaco style ones we normally expect to see around Mexico. Only Ferrari actually doing that, which is quite interesting and probably explains why there's just that little bit of a gap there where, Ferrari might just be off the pace a bit.
It's an interesting point because on the one hand, they're running a unique wing that might have them a bit slower than McLaren. But then we heard Carlos Sainz say on Friday that the profile of the turns is similar enough to Coda, and that was a track that they did really well at, that perhaps Ferrari stand to have a better weekend. How do you compare the track similarities between Coda and Mexico versus that differential with the rear wing, and how that could play into who's actually faster?
I think Carlos is certainly more suited to the setup. He's having a lot less problems what Charles is having this weekend, especially in, I think it was the second or third sector. I saw some data which suggests that he's a lot more happier going through there than what Charles is with whatever setup he's got. It's all about the engines. It's all about the air. We know that they compromise the air intake because of it. We know they've opened up all of the call-ins. Ferrari've got these humongous sharp sort of ducts on them this weekend. They've literally, like, you might as well run without of engine cover in some respects. So they've opened it right there. But it's not a happy hunting ground for Ferrari. Is it two wins in like total in Mexico in like the whole history or something random like that? I saw that stat earlier. So it's not normally a happy hunting ground for him. So I feel that McLaren is starting to show their pace a bit more. I feel they're starting to show what they've got. Red Bull just seem completely off it at the moment. I know Max didn't get a lot of running. Whether or not that was just running a program because he hasn't got that running. So FP3, Max could be a dark horse as always, but we know he swapped that engine out for another engine and they've been tweaking stuff in there. But yeah, Checo hasn't really looked on it either all weekend. So that Red Bull looks like it's struggling around here as well.
Couple of quick points on Max, Terry. You had mentioned the history around this circuit a little while ago. Max has won 5 out of the last 6 races here, and the last 3 have been Verstappen. Hamilton won 2, so definitely the history here favors those 2 drivers, but the free practice data definitely doesn't favor them. And we're going to talk about the simulations, and those 2 are both a bit lower there as well. You had mentioned also Verstappen taking some new engine parts, but I believe that's also within his allocation, so no penalty expected for Max, right?
Yeah, no. So we've basically Red Bull and Mercedes broke curfew last night to do changes to the car. So George had a new chassis after that crash yesterday, but his gearbox and his power unit was intact, so they were able to use that one. And Max has taken a new engine because of an air intake problem, but he's taken one out of his allocations. So he hasn't taken a new one to get a penalty. He's gone back to a different one, basically. So it's a different engine in it, but it's a used engine out of his pool. So there's no penalties at the moment for anybody, I don't believe, from what I can see.
Interesting. Just Robert Schwartzman, who will not be competing tomorrow.
Yeah, who might never serve that like Jensen Button. You know.
All right. I forgot to mention that, as always, if you want to have us review your lineup throughout the course of the hour, go over to the FanAmp app and the Fantasy Formula Base, take a picture of your team and drop it in there. We'll pop it up on screen. And also make sure you answer our 5th Gear Garms contest question this week, which is all about the homecoming hero, Sergio Perez. Will he score more or less than his average over the last 10 races, which is 13 points? Terry, we didn't get your feedback on this on Monday. Rob and I both say no. What do you think?
I've not seen anything to convince me otherwise. There's been nothing. I'm sorry. Sorry if there's any Checo fans in the chat, but no.
If there are any, do be sure you say hi so we can send our regards to you. A lot of our friends are popping up in the chat. Hi, Jeremy. I'm going to get to your lineup in just a few minutes. Hey, Mike. Alligators in the chat. Kev's here. Joe's here. Looks like we got a great group tonight. All right. One thing I want to cover off next before we start the first batch of questions from the chat is just looking at the post FP2 sims. I'm going to hit F5 real fast just to make sure Ryder didn't update with FP3. No, we don't have it yet. Mike always keeps me honest in the chat once he updates it, but it'll probably happen in the next 20 minutes or so. As you can see, it's a runaway for Norris and Leclerc, basically just hedging your bets between McLaren and Ferrari, which one of those 2 constructors is going to stand out this week. And then their teammates in a dead heat between Sainz and Piastri. So for those of us that can afford Norris and Leclerc, I think you're going to see me recommending that to more and more people as the show goes on. And then looking down at the constructors, certainly Ferrari and McLaren stand out. Red Bull starting to stick their nose in here again, particularly because the promise of Verstappen and then the pit stop points. Typically, when you have multi-stop races, Red Bull are good for at least 5 extra pit stop points, whereas the others are alternating week to week. One other thing I want to call out as we move down a little bit, it looks like the V-Carb drivers have a slightly higher expected point total than the rest of the midfield, so they may be a good option this week as well. Although I'll tell you, Yuki Tsunoda's form around this track has been abysmal, so you won't see me recommend him to too many folks today. All right, let's head over to the chat, starting with Matt. Matt says, stick with triple McLarens that didn't maximize my 3X last week. Me too. Move one or both drivers out for Ferrari or something else. As F1 gets better, fantasy becomes more confusing. That is the truth, Matt. For me, seeing Leclerc and Norris at the top of this table here, and you're going to see a few other places where they're at the top, I think that's your best bet for this week. It's boring, it's simple, but I think it's going to be really effective. And if you're feeling fancy, put the 2X boost on Leclerc because that could be your differential. But I think that's going to be one of the best plays for this week. Terry, what do you think?
No, I think so. I'm still not seeing past it yet. I think, I don't think you can go wrong with either of those two options. I think, anything Ferrari, McLaren is going to be there or thereabouts. And I think it's whether or not Carlos can kind of get in the middle of the two McLarens or Leclerc can get a good lap and get into the middle. And then I think it's then all going to be about the first turn and avoiding any carnage going into it, isn't it, really, for the actual race itself?
And I think there's going to be a lot of people with an itchy trigger finger to try to get that differential in this week. There are a couple of mild options that we can recommend for you, but really with Brazil coming up next week, that's a historically strong track for Mercedes. I'm probably going to recommend you hold the big changes for just one more week. All right, let's head down to Jeremy. Jeremy says, leaning on Norris and Leclerc autopilot this week, also with a combination of Colapinto, Bottas, Sonoda, and Lawson. So looks like Jeremy's got a good team. The autopilot is definitely a great shout because looking at pretty much all of the data we have here, the sims, I'm going to show betting lines in just a moment. These two drivers are super close to one another, and it's not obvious to me which one's going to score the most points. So maybe the autopilot will come in handy for you there. Matt counterpointed with maybe saving autopilot for Brazil sprint, possibly. On a sprint weekend, you can use the autopilot, and that delta between the number one and number two driver tends to spread out a bit, as we saw with Leclerc last week at Coda. So that could certainly work out too. Terry and I were just marveling over some of the betting lines a little while ago. So I'm going to share a few of the most important ones to you. Now, this whole concept of looking at betting lines came up when I talked to Raheem, who's P1 in the Global League right now with his Porsche F1 team. You can see when we look at the winner of this race, it's a dead heat between Lando and Charles and a bit of a drop-off between Verstappen, despite his record at this circuit, Sainz, despite finishing in the top three in all three free practice sessions. This is what really stands out to me because Vegas, they pay these guys lots of money to make the smartest decisions possible. And so when in doubt, I go with Vegas.
I was just marveling at that Max Verstappen odds. And purely from a speculative point of view, knowing it's Max Verstappen rather than a quantitative from what we've seen so far.
If you see Terry on his phone in the next few minutes, he's throwing a few bucks on Max Verstappen.
This way, loaded up Max.
Another thing I wanted to call out is first retirement. This seems pretty obvious to us at this point. Colapinto just being in a Williams, his driving style isn't unsafe or anything, but it's the Williams and their reliability, and certainly Zhou Guanyu as well in that Sauber. Who knows when it's ever going to give out on him. Rob and I joke about that week in and week out, so keep an eye on that. And then the other thing I wanted to call out here is the fastest lap. Charles and Lando, again, in a dead heat. This is completely even, and then a bit of a drop-off to Max and a bigger drop-off to the rest of the field. So that's why if you go with these two drivers, betting lines favor a race win and or fastest lap for each of them. So that's great news. Let's see.
I said Sims are out.
Are they? Fantastic. I just want to show one other thing, and then we'll go back to it. Total number of classified drivers, the over-under is 18.5. That's basically Vegas's way of saying we think maybe one person's going to have an engine problem, and then everything else is going to go according to plan. So if you have these backmarker drivers, it might not be the end of the world to run this week for a double premium at the top of your lineup. All right, let's digest the post-FP3 sims together as they reset. Let's check. There we go, FP3. And at first glance, it's McLaren just edging out their Ferrari counterparts, separating now by about a point and a half compared to where they were previously, but nothing earth-shattering. It looks pretty validating of a Norris-Leclerc lineup. Same thing with McLaren and Ferrari at the bottom here. Let's navigate down a little bit. You can see Perez, the expected points is 15. So the Rider Sims do suggest that he might beat his 10-race historical average. But it's a bit of a fall from grace for George Russell. He was on the front row of the sprint race last weekend. To see him all the way down below Perez is a bit of a disappointment. And then a far cry down to Fernando Alonso celebrating his 400th race. Terry, I imagine that's why you're wearing your Aston Martin green today. Congratulations to Fernando.
I chucked coffee down my other one about 5 minutes before we come on there.
I was waiting for you to say, actually, it's Lance Stroll time.
Yeah.
You don't see the 18.
It was the nearest one in the wardrobe. I'd like to say it was deliberate to celebrate Fernando, but it was quickly grabbed the nearest one.
I respect your honesty. All right, let's head back over to the chat, see if we have any other good questions before we kick things over to the lineups. Mike says, like OJ, he's never going to serve his sentence, talking about Schwartzman and his 5-place penalty. Well played, Mike. Brian, thanks for joining. I love your 130R and Eau Rouge lineups. It's one of my favorite teams to review every week. Alligator makes a great point. Feels like we've seen Sainz at the top in free practice quite a bit this season. Then Leclerc puts it all together in qualifying. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Brian, Rob had another commitment today, so he wasn't able to join us, but you might have one headphone in while he is wherever he is today, and he sends his regards to all of you.
I'm sure he's keeping an eye on it.
I'll keep an eye on his Twitter to see if he posts his team anytime soon. Greg says in the chat, Rob had to help with some moving. So hopefully he's lifting with his legs and not his back today. All right. Jeffrey in the chat says Norris, Russell, and Albon versus Norris, Sainz, and Zhou, or Piastri, Sainz, and Tsunoda. And in all of that, who to 2x? Who? So if we take it back up to the Sims here, Sainz has a pretty healthy margin over Russell. And I don't think the difference between Albon and Zhou is going to make that much of a difference here. Albon at 4.2, Zhou at 2. So to me, I'd lean toward that Norris, Sainz, Zhou build because Mercedes do feel a bit off. I'd want to see some consistency from them. And like Terry mentioned at the top of the show, they're running different specs of that car. Terry, do you think one Mercedes has the advantage over the other with the different specs?
I'm not entirely sure. I think they're struggling with something because if you look at what happened in Austin with that incident with Lewis, you look at what happened with George, the day before, then you look at what happened to George this weekend. There's something up with the balance on the Mercedes. I don't know whether it's update related or whether or not it's just a setup related, but they've gone off more times in the past couple of weeks than we can remember, and through places where you wouldn't really say they've been pushing. So I wouldn't say that, where Lewis was in the race, he wasn't under that much pressure. He was under that much sort of, it's not a place you'd expect Lewis to make a mistake, as we were total say. George, the day before, yesterday, kind of, you could argue maybe George pushed it, but it didn't really look like he was on a particularly flying lap when he went off. So it kind of just leans me towards that they haven't quite got, once again, they've brought updates, don't quite understand what they're doing, and actually they haven't got the best setup yet on it. I think they're dialing it in, and I think once they can process the data, I think with the triple header, they're just coming too fast to get that data back and get those parts back, and it feels like a bit like a Frankenstein car at the moment.
Yeah, there was a moment in FP3 where Hamilton hooked up a pretty good lap, and then his engineer called in and said, "You're 5/10 off the back of Piastri." He said, "Really? That was a good lap." Yeah. So even Lewis is a bit confused about how slow Mercedes are right now. So it might be a week to hold on to them. Daniel in the chat wants to know Norris and Sainz or Leclerc and Piastri. Who, Daniel, depends on how much of a differential you're shooting for. Now, I think the Norris and Sainz team will be most popular. I suspect Rob, if he hasn't already posted his team, will post a Norris Sainz lineup. And then a Leclerc Piastri. They're really just a matter of 1.5 points off each other. So it is a bit of a coin flip. When we go over to the elite data from last week, you'll see Norris is overwhelmingly the favorite over Leclerc. I doubt the top 500 are going to shuffle to the order of 45% more teams switching from Leclerc to Norris. So I suspect a lot of top teams will run Norris up here. And then a lot of them have also 2x'd him. So I think that's the safer play. But then by contrast, the Leclerc team is the bigger differential play. If you're behind in your mini league, you want to make a big run on the global ranks, you could switch it up that way and still be pretty safe. Terry, any strong opinions on that?
No, I think it's what you said. I think a lot of people will probably keep Lando because of save the transfer as well. Because a lot of people probably run him last week. So I think there's a bit of that going on where actually it's within your benefit to kind of keep him rather than transfer him out just to replace him with Charles. I don't feel a lot of people will waste a transfer on that at the moment. With such a small gap between what they're both expected to score, it's kind of keep with Lando after that free practice free result where he's coming back towards the top.
Mike in the chat says, do not trust Yuki. You want to know why? 3 appearances here. DNF, P12. That is not a race history that gives me any warm and fuzzies on Yuki. If you've got that much money, you can afford Liam Lawson, put Liam Lawson in. All right. Alligator says, probably going Norris, Leclerc, Bottas, Albon, Colapinto, Ferrari, Mercedes. Ooh, interesting, Allie. So you're going with the differential play with Mercedes instead of McLaren. Who to put the 2X on? I would say if you're trying the differential week, slap it on Leclerc and see if you get the differential payoff for it. Or if you're feeling like Mercedes is as risky as you're feeling, Lando is definitely a good shout for it as well. The only driver on the grid to get 30 or more points in each of the last 5 races. So he's certainly not going to let you down with the 2X. Terry, what do you think about a Ferrari-Mercedes pairing for constructors?
I think it's adventurous. I'm not sure I've seen enough from Mercedes. I think, like you say, it's definitely going to be a difference maker. I fear one way or the other, if I'm honest. You're either going to lose some extreme ground or you're going to come out of it right. I just haven't seen anything from Mercedes in terms of a setup or a hot lap or anything that makes me think that they've got some hidden race pace over the McLarens and the Ferraris still. So, and I still fancy Max to get in amongst, certainly ahead of one of the 2 Mercedes drivers, if not both, to be honest. So it kind of pushes them back into that 5th, 6th round, doesn't it? And out of the podiums, out the top of the grid, so to speak. But I don't know. I mean, they've gone okay around here in the past. They've gone well, like you say. When Red Bull haven't been winning, they have. But it's just like we keep saying, there's nothing there which makes me want to take a bet on it, unless you are trying to get that difference. And actually, it's probably worth it if you've got nothing to lose on that front.
And part of it, as I look at Alligator's team, there might be an issue with budget here where you just can't afford it all. So it's double premium driver and you got to take the step back to Mercedes or run a Norris, George Russell for McLaren and Ferrari. So maybe it's just 6 of one, half dozen of the other 2 on how you do it.
Yeah, I must admit that was one of the problems when I looked to mine. Do I drop the constructors down for 2 drivers, or do I stick with two good constructors in it? And I think that was the only movement on my lineup in terms of what I could make was a big change. And then naturally, if you're going away from that, Ferrari and that McLaren one, your step down is naturally going to be Mercedes because of the cost on it to free up some budget. So that's probably another reason, like you say. It's a really good point, actually.
I'm going to cover off one more question, then we'll start jumping into lineups. This is from Rania in the chat. How about Kevin? I assume you mean Kevin Magnussen. And, it's interesting. For as hot as Haas were in the middle part of the season, let me read you off the last handful or so of races from K-Mag. Going back to Belgium, 6, 7, 9, 7, -1, and 9 on the sprint weekend last week. So his last double-digit fantasy performance was all the way back in Silverstone. So Haas aren't as automatic a midfield play as they used to be, especially when you see how tight things have been with Williams lately and his teammate Nico Hülkenberg. You can see the top 500 teams only running Magnussen at a clip of 4% at COTA. So clearly there's been a shift in the sentiment of the midfield. A lot of folks with that same sort of money taking Liam Lawson, Yuki Tsunoda, and Double Williams at a much higher clip. All right. Let's go over and check out a few lineups here. So Tony shares a spicy trio: Norris, Verstappen, Leclerc, triple Ferrari, and -30. So let's rule that last one right out the door. To me, I think Tony sent this before FP3 because I was looking at his lineup earlier. Obviously, the easier play would be Norris, Leclerc, upgrade that midfield because I think he can do Lawson, Hülkenberg in his midfield, and that would be the differential. If I had to pick between team 1 and team 2, I'd probably go with team 1. That way, if Max doesn't totally hook it up, Lando will probably carry enough points to make it work. If McLaren are truly P1 and P2, the first session we saw with those engines tuned up was FP3, and that's what they were. You'd be looking at best at P3 and P4 with that middle lineup, so I'm not sure about it. Terry, what do you think?
I think Tony's just putting there, he's thinking of changing it because is that thinking triple McLaren or Norris Leclerc after FP3 and dropping to something else? So
that sounds much more like it.
Yeah, that sounds much more like it.
Max is a good 6 million above most of the other options here. So distribute that budget amongst better midfield drivers and then either Piastri or Leclerc there.
And again, I don't think I'll lose to. It's a coin toss, isn't it? I think, I don't think there's nothing to really say go one way or the other. It's literally, I think, what you fancy before you hit lock.
We talked to Jeremy a little while ago. Looks like he's in between some similar options. I like the current team, perhaps with Leclerc over Piastri. Piastri's a pretty safe differential as well. I see he could fit Liam Lawson in. That's a great differential. And then autopilot, I could definitely see the case for it this week because it's unclear which out of Lando or Charles will be the best. So you're welcome to use it. And to his comment about rolling a transfer, I think if you're in between a couple of guys that are right next to each other in terms of expected points, roll over a transfer because who knows what's going to happen at Brazil. It could be wet. Mercedes could figure things out, and then you'll need those 3 transfers. It's better to have them and not need them next week than play around with minutia this week and then not have them in Brazil. All right. Poll question from the chat. Which of these constructors will have the highest scoring weekend? Red Bull, Ferrari, or McLaren? Wow. And the people have spoken. They think McLaren's FP3 is real. Terry, do you disagree?
No, I don't think I do. I think, like we said, McLaren looks strong. Ferrari looks strong. Red Bull, it's one car at the moment, isn't it? I don't want to go on the Checo hating, but
I have a somewhat related question, but also unrelated to fantasy. We've gotten to this point where Checo was disappointed pretty much the whole weekend, but you knew he was going to compete this weekend because he's so big in Mexico. Is there a chance that we hear some news about him in the next few weeks? Either that he's retired or he's retired?
No, I think at the end of the season, I've said this quite a few times. I think that we're so close to the end of the season now. I don't think that Red Bull will make a change now. I think they wait to the end of the season, see what the options are, see where everyone finishes. I still think that Checo's contract clauses are linked to his end of season performance. So I think that those break clauses people were quoting at the midway point were midway contract clauses. Then normally all contract clauses are end of season. Very rarely do you get mid-season ones. So I think there's so many points away where he finishes in the constructors, etc., etc. They're in every driver's contract. Let's be honest, it's not just Checo. They're in every driver's contract. All these clauses are. And I think that they kick in at the end of the season. So I think that's when we're going to see this natural stop and see what happens. I don't think we're going to see it before because I don't see the advantage with what they did with Daniel and the potential replacements now for the end of the season. I don't see what they do. You're not going to get Checo going to VCOB, let's be honest about it. So he will see out the season, collect the sponsorship, renegotiate that way. So I think he's safe until the end of the season. But I think in the summer, it might be a whole different ballgame.
All right, let's look at Brian's lineups here. He has a few options: Norris Sainz, Norris Leclerc, Sainz Piastri with Red Bull, and triple McLaren. I like the second lineup with 2X Norris, Leclerc, and Pierre Gasly. We haven't talked about Gasly, but let me tell you, his last few races here, going back to 2018, P10, P9, P4, P11, P11. If that Alpine's even slightly hooked up, he could be fine this weekend. Give you a really great differential in the midfield.
Yeah, he certainly struggled in practice as he was set up. But like you say, I think if he's one of them drivers, if he stays out of trouble first few laps, might just actually just keep it in amongst it and do well out of it. But I think I'm not sure I'd go Red Bull constructors at all. Like I said earlier, we've not seen enough from them. So I think you 1 and 2, aren't you, really?
For the price, it's really too much. If they were priced somewhere around the Ferrari Mercedes range, it might be interesting, but there's so much valuable money you could splash around by moving out of them. It makes no sense to me either. Merc to Ferrari 2025. Lots of options here with the autopilot, and then a few, it looks like Mercedes on the left, triple Ferrari on the right. So Terry, in a world where you don't have any McLaren drivers, would you rather have triple Ferrari or a mixed bag of either McLaren or Ferrari with a Mercedes driver?
I'll probably mix bag it.
Is there one or the other, the Leclerc, Hamilton, or Norris Russell flavor that suits you better?
I would go Leclerc Hamilton. I think that Lewis around here will. I think that Lewis will still. He's got the better upgrades on the car, so you kind of expect him to be the better of the Mercedes. And I think that what someone put in the chat earlier about how Charles seems to hook it back together. He's riding on confidence, isn't he? Yeah, he's got a few wins under his belt. He looks like a driver who's turned that corner in terms of confidence and back at it. So I would fancy him over Carlos still. And I know we don't talk about favoritism stuff, but you kind of feel that strategy-wise, if it comes down to it, that he's going to get rubbed the green if they're close to each other because of obviously the driver moves that are happening. You kind of feel that we're now at that point of the season where teams are going to start. It's not sabotage, or anything like that. It's just pure logistics of one driver's staying, one driver's going. And if it's 50-50 cool, you know exactly which way it's going to go without a shadow of a doubt. So that's why some of these decisions, I think I still fancy people like Charles who are going to remain with the team.
Fair play. I think for me, I slightly lean toward the first team because in that case, both the drivers do have the preference with Lewis walking after the season, papaya rules for Lando and his hunt to chase down Verstappen. So I like them slightly better, but man, Russell hasn't given me a lot of reason to be excited about him this weekend. All right. Jeremy checking in with triple McLaren and Lawson. Love that budget, Jeremy. And then wants to stay triple McLaren and then just wants some guidance on this missing midfield driver. Tsunoda, Lawson, Albon, and then roll the transfer. I like the current team. Yeah, I like Lawson best out of the three of them. I think Albon's been fine lately, but that Williams, again, that reliability could just let go on you at any time. Lawson is fighting for a seat, potentially Checo's seat, potentially his own seat. So, and Tsunoda's form around this particular track hasn't been encouraging lately. So I'd stick with your previous team.
Yeah, stick with what you got.
Awesome. Opinion snafu. Definitely delivering on your handle again with an opinion snafu. Verstappen, Norris, Ferrari, Mercedes. Norris, Leclerc, Red Bull, Ferrari, or Norris, Leclerc, upgraded midfield with Tsunoda, McLaren, Ferrari. So to me, this depends on how desperate you are for a differential. I see you're at 2.9K, so you're quite high in the global ranks. I would probably keep this third team here, sub Tsunoda out for his teammate, Liam Lawson, if you could. I think they're close enough where you still can, but if Liam's last budget increase puts him out, maybe leaving Yuki there. Terry, do you disagree?
Nah, I would do that.
I'm thinking with a rank this good, I wouldn't do anything too wild like you see on the left here. Maybe next week at Interlagos, this would be back in play, but I'm not sure about this week. We're about 20 minutes away from drawing the contest winner. So if you haven't told us if Sergio Perez is going to score more or less than his 10 race average at 13 fantasy points, do let us know so you have a chance to win this week. Let's see. Which of these midfield drivers are you going with? Albon, Gasly, or neither? And so it looks like a lot of our viewership is with the top 500 teams from the elite data. They're going with Alex Albon, but that percentage of Pierre Gasly runners is starting to increase. Maybe we convinced you in the last few minutes to run Pierre Gasly. Terry, give us a sneak peek of your lineup. Do you have Albon or Gasly?
I've got Alex Albon in mind, I believe. I say believe because I can't remember off the top of my head. I really struggled with my lineup this week. Yeah.
I have confirmed it, and so do I. So right now we're both in the blue. I wish I had enough to get into the pink with Gasly because I think he's the better play this week. Joe. All right. Joe running triple Ferrari, triple McLaren, and then two mixtures. And then the Sainz mixture has you up to Hulkenberg. The Leclerc flavor has Tsunoda. I'm going to probably stay boring and go with this third team, Norris, Leclerc, Tsunoda. I like I like the double V carb, triple Ferrari down here, but I just don't have the guts to pull the trigger on it. Terry, is double V carb enough for you to pull the trigger on all of the McLaren drivers out?
No, I think I would play safe and put McLaren driver in there, if I'm honest. But then, you know, it's a time for bold moves, isn't it? So actually, press the trigger, Joe. Do it.
And, you know, I was dogging on Magnussen earlier. I want to give Hulkenberg the same treatment because last week was a sprint race. He got 11 points, good for him. But then going backwards from that, 6-6, -3, 6-2-0. So it's not like their overtaking ways have been as pronounced as they were in the middle of the season. So Haas aren't as obvious as they used to be.
No, and also remember they've shortened that DRS zone as well, so that might have an impact on overtaking. I know overtaking here last year was pretty high, but actually with that shortened DRS zone, we haven't seen that in any race form whatsoever. So that could put a dampener on one of the overtake manoeuvres going into that corner on that one. So that could make a big difference in terms of making up places and obviously points, etc., etc. So we got to bear that in mind. It's not the same layout as last year either.
For those of you considering Sainz, one point I will make is that Sainz is one of the few front runners that's still in Tier B. So if you see a lineup, potentially a Lando and Max, or some sort of big upgrade to your midfield, and you're $500,000 or $1 million away from it, a team like the one on the right could be worth a shout if you can time Sainz and Hulkenberg having a good week and giving you that boost to get there. But at this point in the season, at least for me, a lot of the next tiers of lineups are $2 and $3 million away. So I'm simply not going to be able to stack up enough budget plays to make the delta in points worth it so that I'd actually afford that lineup and make up for the points lost in those weeks where I gain that budget. All right, here is Caroline. In Caroline's options, triple Ferrari or Norris, Leclerc, Gasly. Well, in light of everything we've said recently, I love Norris, Sainz, Gasly. Terry, what do you think?
Yeah, no, definitely go with that one. I think you know Hulkenberg, like you say, he's not showing enough. Has to kind of gone behind development wise in the past few races. I know they had that big upgrade package in Austin, but they've kind of been caught, I feel, by the rest of the teams who've got their act together. Alpine and VCARB, they've all made those steps up, and I think can kind of clawed them back a bit, haven't they, over the past few races? That's been a big factor as well.
And then our friend Arkun has triple McLaren and then Piastri, Leclerc, Ferrari, McLaren. I imagine, that's interesting. I think there's a little, how does it work that you can afford this, basically the same line? Oh, it looks like going from Zhou to Albon is the difference between Lando and Leclerc there. I think for me, I'd rather go with the best drivers possible. So Norris, Piastri, or Norris, Leclerc, rather than try to take the chance on the midfield. Albon, I suspect another race or two from now, he's going to turn into a pumpkin and he's going to have a tough race. So if that's the difference between you taking the step down from Lando, I would just keep him.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's like you say, the constructors where the points are, and then you know your best 5 drivers, don't you, that you can get. So I think Lando and Oscar on that one.
Fantastic. All right, let's get back into the chat if I can ever find it. There we go. Let's see. Brian asked a while ago, how are we feeling about Mercedes constructor? Not good. Not good. I am packing the 5th Gear Garms Mercedes shirt today, and I'm just trying to manifest slightly better than Coda for them.
It's habit, isn't it?
It is. It is. I am slowly turning over my wardrobe. My first Ferrari zip up is in the dryer right now. I'm preparing for Lewis's move. All right. Terry, as I start going through these questions, I'm going to pull up your lineup, and you maybe can give us a quick walkthrough on what you have this week. Just let us know what was your motivation for this team.
I'm stuck in that budget sense, to be honest, where I can't make too many moves, and I'm kind of hamstring behind it. So I've kept the same lineup at the moment purely because the moves I've made doesn't really inspire me with any confidence in terms of the changes that I could make. Like I said, I think you're downgrading the constructors. Didn't feel it was worth it in terms of what I've seen from the Mercedes sims and what they've done. So I'm banking on Lando, if I'm honest, in terms of that, and then hoping that George doesn't have a disaster. I mean, George, I thought was going to have a bad week last week, but actually pulled out the bag in the end. So it's one of those where I just can't move to the level I want to in terms of what I've got. So frustrating, but yeah, that's where we're at with it.
Terry, you're in a similar boat to Seth in the chat, and he's in between Norris and Russell or Norris and Sainz. Could you talk a little bit about why you picked Russell over Sainz, and maybe that'll help Seth too?
I just, to be honest, I just left it more in there because of the fact it was in there. So for me, I just think that Russell will do okay around here. So it was more. I just not sure that Sainz is going to hook it together and do much more than Russell. I feel that a Mercedes might get in amongst it somewhere. And if any of the two are, I kind of fancy George to do it, mainly because I can't afford Lewis anyway. So I think George will be in amongst it. But I think Sainz is equally a good option. Yeah, he's certainly one you can change to. And
no, that makes a lot of sense. All right. Overwatch wants to know, do we think Lawson is making it in the points? I don't think he'll quite make it into the points. Terry, do you think he's going to have a top 10 finish?
No, I don't. I think it's going to be about 12th would be my, if I was placing money on him.
I don't feel good about him or Fernando in his 400th Grand Prix. That Aston Martin's not looking too great. So maybe that means we have some surprise point finishers.
I think it would need an instant or something to bring some of these into the mix. It would need something which says, actually, yeah, something's happened to somebody to put out. But again, it's not what 50% safety car. It's not a big safety car track, really. Lots of big runoff areas. I know there's that turn is at 12 where they've been having problems with this weekend. Maybe that's the only place where we've seen Alex go off there. We've seen George go off in that area. If someone goes off there, it's a safety car. Sort of rounds, isn't it? So that's the only thing.
Yeah, I think it would take multiple safety cars to get Lawson back in the equation. And like you said, it's pretty low odds in Mexico. So I think you'll do fine from a fantasy perspective. Plenty of overtakes in that midfield. Yeah. But in terms of actual championship point finish, I don't think he'll be delivering any for VCarb. Here's a quick look at my lineup. And if you've been listening to me all show, it was pretty obvious what I was going with. Just one move. Piastri to Leclerc, going to hedge my bets, keep that 2x on Lando for this week, and then carry a third transfer over to Interlagos. That way, if Mercedes does anything out of the ordinary, I can make that pivot with plenty of moves to spare.
Yeah, going back to mine was purely budget. I couldn't actually stretch to one of the Ferrari drivers. That was why. So looking at it, I'm literally just short. So that's it. That's the other reason, was just purely without dropping a constructor to get Ferrari in. For me, there was no way to do it, which is why George was left in there, to be honest. So that's the main reason. I think I was like 0.2 short of making a Ferrari, swapping George out for Carlos. So it's frustrating. So annoying.
All right, let's rapid fire through some questions here. Jay McChem wants to know, Gasly or Albon? Give me Gasly this week. I'm into it. Ooh, good call out by our friends at FanAmp. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to like and comment on the videos. It gets us enough traction. That way we can continue to offer you more and more fun fantasy content as the season goes on. And I can already tell you, we've got 2 more big interviews lined up before the end of the year. So all that work you're doing to get the word of the fantasy formula out there, it's working.
Absolutely. Make sure you're subscribing as well, because you won't want to miss them when they drop. And the best way is if you are a subscriber, because you get notified. Makes it nice and easy.
Good work, Terry. Jim wants to know, let's see, he's got Norris, Leclerc, Sonoda, and Hulk, or swap Leclerc to Sainz and Hulk to Mag. No, I don't think that doesn't do enough for me. Upgrading Hulk to Mag by downgrading Leclerc to Sainz. No, I think Leclerc's onto something this weekend. Terry, do you agree?
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Alberto's giving us a shout out from Foro Sol. Are you at the track today, Alberto? That's wonderful.
I think he is. I saw some about the FanAmp meetup in there as well, just a bit further down. So going past in Mexico, I think they are.
Terrific. All right. Let's see. A few of these we've covered off already, so I'm going to try to slide down a bit. But if I missed your question, by all means, feel free to throw it back in the chat and we can cover it off shortly. Oh, I see Ewan in the chat. We're a few minutes late for you, Ewan, but thanks so much for joining. I hope you're still here and that you've got your lineup locked in soon too. Big man Raizzo, I'm sticking with it. Gasly over Albon. I know Alpine as my sleeper all the way back in Bahrain. That was my big take for this year, and it is totally tanked. But I think this is the week that they make me an honest man. All right. Ruben wants to know, he has 3 transfers from Mexico. If I only make 2 of them, do I have 3 for Brazil? Yes, you carry them over. Now, the only thing that would stop you from carrying those 2 transfers over is if you use the limitless or wild card chips that give you unlimited transfers. Regardless of how many you have before you set that chip, you'll go back to the default of 2 afterwards. Bassam in the chat says, Lando, Leclerc, Zhou, Albon, Colapinto, McLaren, and Ferrari. Only 1 transfer used. Roll 1 for the next race or replace Zhou with Bottas. Ooh. I have a terrible feeling about Zhou every single week, so I almost think it's worth using that transfer. Terry, what do you think?
Originally, I was going to go, doesn't matter, because they're both where they are, but I think out of the 2, I've always hedged my bets more on Bottas than what I have on Zhou, to be honest, at the moment. So I think if you can move away from Zhou in any way you can, no disrespect to him, it's probably a wise move to try and do it.
Good. I don't know if you pronounce this Sock or Saki, but is it worth it to run Norris and 4 midfield drivers, maybe get some extra money to have a banger team next week, or go Leclerc, Piastri, Colapinto, Bottas, Zhou? I wonder if you'd actually be better off running Leclerc Sainz, get your tier B asset that's actually got a chance of going really well this week.
Yeah.
Maybe getting $500,000 or $1 million from them rather than a bunch of dart throws in the midfield. And then if you're really trying to scrounge for budget, if something happens to one of those tier A drivers, we know they're going to lose 0.7 million in value, and maybe you luck your way into a better team for Interlagos. Awesome. Let's see. Joel wants to know Albon or Lawson. I'm going to go with Lawson.
Yeah, I'll go Lawson.
Absolutely. Triple McLaren or Norris Sainz. Can't do Leclerc. Ooh, now I'm in triple McLaren range. Norris Leclerc I prefer, but triple McLaren would stand out to me, especially based on what we saw in FP3. And for anyone who missed the first 2 minutes of the show, Sainz was top 3 in all 3 free practice sessions, but McLaren were saying the data indicated that their engine mode was turned down, and as soon as FP3 hit, they were P1 and P2. So that's enough to move the needle for me. Caroline says Leclerc, Piastri, or Sainz, Norris. I'm going to say Sainz, Norris, because Sainz is still in tier B. Maybe you can get a few extra in the gain for Sainz so that you can afford a Norris Leclerc next time. And I haven't jinxed Piastri recently, but he's still the only driver to complete every Grand Prix lap. That's only happened 13 times in the history of F1. So his day could be coming. And if it does, he loses 0.7. Sainz gets a $500,000 increase because he's finishing in the top 3 or 4. And then all of a sudden you're in business.
Well, but I mean, Sherry wants to know Yuki Lawson.
I'll let you take that one, Terry.
I'll put it Lawson. I just feel he's got the point to prove, hasn't he? He's driving, like you said earlier, not only for where his current team, potentially the move up as well. So he knows he's on this 6 races or whatever is left in terms of pretty much a shootout for him. Every week's a shootout for him, isn't it, to prove himself? So I think that on that basis, you would have to go Lawson just purely on that front. And going back to what you said about Yuki's form around here, doesn't fill me with the confidence to say Yuki on that front. So I'm going Leo.
DNF P12 is that form. It is not good at all. Derek Britton, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you joined us. Zhou and Hulk or Lawson and Albon?
Lawson and Albon, I think.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. Zhou is just enough of a DNF risk, and Hulk hasn't been special since the middle of the season, where it's not as big of a play as it used to be.
Yeah, welcome, Derek. Thank you for dropping in.
Ooh, let's see. What else we got?
HF
HF wants to know Sonoda or Albon. So we're playing the midfield roulette now in the last few minutes here. I'm gonna say Sonoda, but keep your fingers and toes crossed because he's got to bust out of a bad streak at this circuit.
I've said that one a couple of times. Have Lando and Alonso right now. Shall I move to Sainz and Russell? Other drivers are Joe Bottas and Colapinto. I mean, Lando's going to get your points. Alonso is. I'm not seeing anything from Aston Martin this week. But then is Alonso going to do better than Russell? I mean, Russell, you'd expect to do better. I mean, Aston Martin hasn't looked like they've got anything spectacular at all, and they're going to be dropping back again. I'll probably move to Sainz and Russell, but yeah, I think I would. I think the drag on Alonso is going to be too much on that one.
Agreed. And I was just looking at Alonso's last few races. He only has 2 double-digit fantasy performances since Spain. So there's clearly something not hooked up with him, and he seems to be hanging around between P9 and P14 and not really moving around very much. So it makes for some pretty low output fantasy days for him.
I've got another interesting stat about Alonso. Did you know that going into last weekend's Grand Prix, he only had 10 more points in that terrible Honda year at McLaren?
Ew.
Which shocked me completely, and no one's really picked up on that. It's really interesting fact that literally going into last week, he's only got 10 more points in that terrible GP2 McLaren Honda year.
So no one will be happier to see. Nobody will be happier to see Adrian Newey than Fernando Alonso. My goodness.
No, really good shout. There's some really good interviews with Fernando on the back of his 400th race. He talks quite highly about Adrian coming. I think it was on the Formula One podcast this week. Is it the Full Nation one? But yeah, really good insight into just how he works and what he's looking forward to for the future. So he doesn't look like he's going anywhere soon, put it that way, for another couple of years.
Hopefully Fernando can pull out a big one. If Fernando in his 400th race finishes in the top 7 or so, I can see a sneaky driver of the day coming for him. So it's unlikely, but I'd love to see it. Let's see. Dan wants to know, between the 2 Haas drivers and the 2 RB drivers, I don't know how many you get to pick, Dan, so maybe we can power rank them for you. For me, I'd probably say, I'm so out on Yuki because of his track history here. I'd say Lawson, Hülkenberg, Magnussen, Yuki.
That's the order I was going to go. Yeah.
Great. Clayton in the chat says triple McLaren, Hulk, Lawson, Colapinto, Ferrari, plus 3 changes, but possibly I don't need any changes. So Clayton, in your spot, you have a wonderful budget that you can have triple McLaren, Hulk, and Lawson. That's great. I think the closest thing to a change you would have is Piastri to Leclerc if you want to split your risk a little bit, but triple McLaren's perfectly fine this week too.
Definitely.
Terry, Kev wants to know if you can repeat the podcast you mentioned, because he's always on the lookout for an insightful F1 podcast that isn't the Fantasy Formula.
Fan Amper did it for me, look. The Fan Nation one, look, they are.
There it is, yes. And I'm a particularly big fan of F1 Explains. I really enjoy that podcast because they always have some really good guests on. All right, I am going to load up the contest question. We've got a good showing this week. I'm going to drop them in and fire off this wheel. It's Joe. Oh, awesome work, Joe.
Well done,
congratulations. Joe. We will be in touch to get you your Fifth Gear Garms gift certificate. And there's a lot of great stuff on Fifth Gear Garms right now. If you go check it out, they've got posters and hats and shirts. And it seems like they're always on the cutting edge of what is next in the fan community. They had some great Coda shirts for last week. So I'm excited to see what they have coming up for the rest of the year too. Let's see. Think First wants to know why Leclerc over Sainz when our first 3 practices, Sainz came out on top. Great question. Terry, I'll give you the first crack at it.
I just think that Charles will hook it more together in qualifying, and that will just give him a better position in the race, to be honest. Pure and simple. I think that, Sainz has done really well around here, but I just fancy Charles to just have that hooked up lap, that better lap, give him a better position. And then, like I said earlier, I think that Ferrari will prioritise him. They seem to have got his strategy pretty bang on recently in terms of, messing about with a couple of one stops and making him go long. He seems more at ease. But like I did say earlier, the only other thing is Sainz looks happier with that middle sector. So that might just throw a spanner in the works in terms of, the lap from Leclerc. So it's one to watch out for. But I just think Charles will just piece it all together and come good.
It was something that Alligator said earlier in the stream. It always seems like Sainz is faster in the free practice, and then Charles somehow finds a way to put it all together faster in the Grand Prix. And also,
it reminds me of what James Allison said about when Lewis goes out, that actually in practice sometimes he doesn't look like he's actually got the best stats because he's literally pushing it onto the limit all the time. And maybe that's something Charles does a lot more than what Carlos does, just takes it that little bit more, so that when it comes to those qualifying laps and those fast laps, he's just found that edge.
And the reason why I lean toward Leclerc over Sainz in this case, just showing you some of the odds after FP3, even though Sainz was better in most of that free practice, you can see Charles still a pretty good shout to win the race, very close to Lando Norris. And I'll spare your eyes the rapid scrolling, but fastest lap, also very similar between Lando and Charles. Sainz a bit out of the picture despite the free practice pace. All right, let's do a couple other quick ones before we wrap for today. Andy wants to know second free transfer to move Bottas to Lawson or roll the transfer. Okay, so it's an obvious improvement going from Bottas to Lawson or roll the transfer. Let's see. Let's look at these points here. Lawson's at 3.5, Bottas at 2.5. So the Sims are basically predicting they're going to middle around for a while and barely have any overtakes and be similar.
Sprint weekend might be a rolling transfer for the sake of a point or two.
Yeah, because heaven forbid Mercedes come in, you have to make 3 transfers. I don't want to have on my conscience that I had you move on from a lower midfield driver for the sake of that third transfer.
You're made to sleep.
Awesome. All right, everybody. It looks like we're just through the end of all of the questions and all of the lineups. So thank you all so much for joining. Rob and I will be back, and Terry, and a special guest this week as we look at the next sprint race at Interlagos. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll catch you soon.
Thank you, everyone. See you all soon.